So, I'm here because your team have mentioned that you guys are studying economics, yes?
Yes.
And you want to understand how the world works, probably in a more realistic way than what you're learning from your textbooks, maybe, yeah? And you have ambitions to get into the field of economics, maybe finance, maybe banking, maybe central banking, an array of these topics, yes or no? Are there any fields that you guys want to go into that I haven't mentioned yet? What's that? Journalism? Yeah, yourself?
I'm actually from law, so yeah.
Law? Okay. Okay, so you just dropped in. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so what you guys are going to need to understand is that as you finish your degrees, whether it's your undergraduate, your masters, maybe PhDs, is that you need to find a way to apply what you study in theory to the real world. And the good thing is you guys are studying economics. If this room is filled with IR graduates, international relations, then I would have a feast with you, because IR is not the topic to study if you want to understand the world. Economics is probably the most important topic that you can study, at least as a base, to truly understand the motivations that international stakeholders have, what pushes them to make certain decisions, right? Why they move in the directions they move into, the fears they have in their work, right? And what the trajectory of the future is for entire nations, companies, sectors, markets, etc. And the best way that you guys can use, the best tools that you must use when understanding the world, is by first of all trying to find a way to apply first principles thinking to world affairs. And that's it. If you guys can master the art of understanding how first principles is applied to world affairs and apply that to every single stakeholder, right, investor, policymaker, corporate leader, you will be in a much better position to have confidence in your understanding of the world. And with that, you're going to be able to help your organizations, the banks you work with, the clients you work with, make better decisions. All right? Because you're all here for a specific reason. You're all here to study economics for a specific reason. Maybe it's your background, how you grew up or where you grew up. Maybe it's your interest in understanding how and why the world works in the way it does. And you're going to get a good foundation in that, in studying economics, but then applying this knowledge that you have to how stakeholders actually make decisions and the pressures they face when making these decisions. You're going to open up a whole new world in your understanding, which is only going to serve you for the better if you take an active view on understanding these things and not a passive view, right? And that's the most important message that I could leave here telling you today. Because many of you may think that the study of economics is good enough and all I need to do is just apply it to my work and I'll learn things along the way. Yes, you will, but to really have a good grasp of how this practice and how this discipline really impacts the world, you need to take an active view on these things and have the energy and the efforts to really understand the reason behind any decision that's made, right? Why interest rates go up and down, right? Why specific investments are made, why countries work together and why some countries don't work together, right? Economics is only one portion of that, but as you get into your careers, understanding this in its holistic nature is going to be what's going to separate you from the average to the elite, okay? So how do you understand world affairs using first principles? So my lesson today is to answer that one main question. And that question is the reason why I started Pareto Economics. I used to work in the city before I started working for my own company. And I realized that no matter if you're a banker, if you're a management consultant, whatever, typically your view on the world is shaped by what the average message is in the news. Unfortunately or fortunately. But in my point of view, unfortunately. So what I noticed is working with the clients that I worked with in the past companies I worked with is that it was a very shallow understanding about international affairs. Very, very shallow, especially when it comes to emerging markets. And this wasn't helped by the fact that emerging markets was talked about often, right? But they're all put into the category of emerging markets. Now the majority of the world is emerging markets. So if you couple everything into Western developed and emerging, you're not giving enough color to the emerging markets. And there's so much activity happening in those parts of the world that are labeled simply as emerging markets, that without the color, without the depth of understanding these things, right, you're going to find your analysis on these things to be very shallow. I don't know how you guys are studying emerging markets in your classes now, but you must take a view on each country and each region and the drivers that impact the development of these countries. So when I started Pareto economics, I started it from the point of view on how do we create a company that does something different to what's already out there, right? And what's already out there are the Bains of the world, the McKinseys of the world, the BCGs of the world, right? The KPMGs of the world, who do work in a lot of different fields, but with their brand name, they can then say, we're now experts in this, now we're now experts in that, because they have such a big brand presence, you know? So I thought, if I'm going to start something on my own, then you're going to have to approach the topic of world affairs in a way which is, number one, actionable and useful, and isn't just an opinion or something based on semantics. Meaning, if the topic of geopolitics is fresh in people's minds today, and you only talk about the symptoms of geopolitics, what you read in the papers and what you see on the news, then you're approaching that topic from the wrong side. You have to go into understanding the drivers of world affairs. And if you can understand the drivers of world affairs, then again, you're in a much better position to apply them to your work, okay? So this is half career advice, half, insights, but I think it's good to give you both, because you guys get lectured to death, I'm sure, on a daily basis on these topics, so you want something more real probably, right? So that's what I want to bring to you today. And it's kind of hard speaking to students, only because students have a theoretical understanding, but they're not real stakeholders in the world yet, So if you approach this talk from a very high level, academic way, then it's going to just fly over your shoulders, because you get that in any case. And if I were to talk to a room full of bankers, then they're much more in tune with what's happening, because it impacts them more, okay? So that's the gap that you guys have to close, trying to find real world experience whilst you're studying, so that it doesn't just fall over your ears and you just take it as just another piece of content that you can either use or discard. So back to basics. First principles thinking, how do you do it? The first thing you have to do is understand a few questions that we've answered and take the logical steps after. So the first question you have to ask is, who are the prime drivers of international affairs? So who runs the world, essentially, right? So if I were to ask you, who do you think runs the world? Who do you think that would be? Shout out names, institutions, freely. Don't be shy.
The US and China.
The US and China run the world. Okay. Anyone else?
Governments in general.
Governments in general. Anyone else?
Corporates.
Corporations?
Corporations. Central banks.
Central banks? Yeah? So what you guys have just described there, anyone else? Anything else? So we have corporations, right? Central banks and governments, right? Now, why do you think these are the institutions from your point of view that run the world? Like, what's the thinking behind that from what you've studied or what you've experienced that make you believe this? So whoever says central banks, hands up. So why do you think central banks?
They have the power to control things like interest rates,
Mhm.
supply of money, etc.
Yeah,
That affects things like inflation,
yeah,
business activity,
yeah.
which in turn has knock-on effects both politically, socially, and also
Okay, okay. Anyone did disagree with that? Anyone think it's governments, and why? Yeah? You in the back and then you... No. Okay, we're going on.
Well, because a lot of the time, central banks and corporations are bound to the government in the sense that they're regulated by the government.
Yeah.
What the government says then feeds down to those two.
To those institutions. Okay. Did everyone hear that? Yeah? Corporations, you said.
Yes.
Why?
Principally because they have such significant influence over both people's way of living. For a large chunk of the population who work for these corporations,
Yeah.
their livelihood, their working hours, their wages, at certain standards, so overall standard of living. Also, the influence that these corporations have in terms of the affairs through means like lobbying,
Yeah.
through means like
Yeah.
through corporate government contracts.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I think that's
That way, yeah? The most important part of what you said there is the last when you talk about lobbying, right? Why is lobbying from corporations to governments and not the other way around?
These corporates are part of the nonprofits, so they're going to want policies which enable them to maximize profits
Yeah.
and create a business environment which suits their objectives.
Mm-hmm.
government, in principle, at least theoretically, government is supposed to be maximizing social welfare, but that I don't think that mandate is as strong as the profit incentive for corporations.
Okay. So I'm going to challenge some of your thinking on this, okay? So from our understanding, the prime driver of international affairs are not corporations. And for the one reason is that they lobby the government to get concessions from government. They need government to do something to help them achieve something, right? Typically it's favorable laws, regulations, whatever it is, to do so. They can't lobby central banks as easy, but they can do that to governments. So if you take it to the root cause, what runs the world are countries, nation states. They're the prime drivers of world affairs. Why? They are the ones who are allowed to go to war with each other. People are citizens of countries. Laws are written by countries, right? Tariffs are placed by countries, right? And whole industries can survive or die to the stroke of a legislative pen. So for any sort of innovation to be allowed to develop, it must have the sign-off by countries. People, when they travel to different parts of the world, they go because maybe the economic situation is favorable, right? And the vision of that country is shaped by the government. Yeah? There's no equivalent to the UN in the world for corporations that is as powerful as these organizations, as these sorts of institutions. Granted, 5 countries control the UN, more or less, but it's still the fact that it's the country, or it's these 5 countries that dominate, which is important, right? Countries may have power over other countries for reasons that we're going to get into. So when you're looking at the world, at least when we look at the world, we're looking at the world through the lens of a nation state, okay? So if we say then, if we are to agree that a country or countries are the most powerful drivers of world affairs, we need to ask then, what do countries want? Or what's their MO? And what countries want essentially is power. Yes or no? Now power has been defined, has been explained through multiple different sources, through military writers, to philosophers, right? To sociologists, anthropologists, etc. But none of them have made it relevant to the stakeholders of today. So we're not talking about this in an academic sense, okay? When we say power, we mean the ability to secure your own national interests. That's what power is, the ability of a country to secure its own interests. And each country in the world has their own interests, which are formed by their capability to actually secure these interests. So it's a positive or negative feedback loop. The more ability you have to secure your own interests, the more your interests grow and the more bold they become. The less capable you are to secure your own interests, the less capable you are to do so. Therefore, your ambitions as a country remain stagnant. And other countries which have more of an ability to control their own interests will then use you as a conduit to get what they want. Yeah? This is realpolitik. So what does a country have at their disposal that they can use to secure their own interests, right? They have a few different things at their disposal, which they use on a daily basis when it comes to creating their vision plans of their country, yeah, and their long-term, mid-term, and short-term strategies. A few of these things include their consumer markets, their military balance, the technological leadership, their systemically important commodities, their geo-strategic positioning, and their financial strength. These are the sort of the core 6 that you can see a country use on a daily basis when reading reports, when looking at the news, when speaking to stakeholders in the world, right? It doesn't have to be even international major stakeholders, right? It could be the coffee shop around the corner, right? It could be the CEO of Goldman Sachs, right? It could be a mother in Botswana. It could be a dentist in Nigeria. It could be any sort of person around the world, is always and constantly feeling the effects of a country securing their own interests, right? And their interests may not be at times the same thing as the interests of the people, right? They have interests that are in a category of their own a lot of the time, and you must see the world through this lens. So for you to be effective in your work, you must rise above what you see and what you hear in the news, how the media wants to shape your opinion of what's happening in the world. You must rise above this, to see the world from a lens which media sits here and your view of the world sits here. Because narrative is probably the most important thing that drives how people see the world. So you're always constantly you're fed narrative by all angles, whether it's corporate narrative, investor narrative, country narrative, right? The 194 plus countries in the world, they all have a specific narrative and all have different size megaphones to showcase that narrative to you. So when you're looking and when you're analyzing how the world is moving and where the world is going towards, looking at the world through narrative building based off of countries' interests, based off of how capable they are to secure their own interests, and looking at the facts and figures there through that line of inquiry is going to be the most effective way for you to understand what happens next. Yeah? And that way you're not going to get stuck in the loop of watching the news and listening to pundits, right, and scrolling through TikTok and reading perhaps even sometimes academic articles when it describes where the world is heading towards, right? Because with academics, very few real world practitioners listen to what the academic world talks about, right? They have different ways in which they understand the world and how they behave in the world, and their interests and what they are allowed to do and what they're bound by sometimes isn't covered as well in academia as I would like, perhaps. So when you're looking at the world, you must look at it through these lenses. Yeah? So don't let anything trigger you as much when you're watching the news. Don't let these narratives feed into your perception of how the world works. Go above that by understanding intention, incentive, right? And capability. The more you practice doing this in your studies and as you get into the world of work, you're going to be in a much better position to understand things as they really are than what those stakeholders want you to perceive it to be. You see? And you're probably reading this with what's happening with Iran and the US, with what's happening to, living standards in the UK, whether it's a trade union talking about it, whether it's a government talking about it, right? Whether it's the NHS talking about how they've been treated, or whatever institution across the world you pay attention to, you must see it through the lens that I mentioned for you to be really effective. So what we did as a company is we quantified these things, right? We added 4 more metrics to the 6 that I just measured, and we quantified these metrics and we ranked all the countries of the world against 10 what we call sub-indices, right? Or specialized indices, yeah? And then we created something called the Global Power Index, which allows you to see a country from a very high level point of view, all the countries in the world, 194 that we measured, and we have a 30-year backlog of seeing data for these countries. So using this approach, you're able to see very, very closely how countries have evolved in time, right? What incentivized them to grow and to make the decisions that they made throughout their lifespan in those 30 years, right? And you can see the results in your lives, right? In your parents' lives, in your friends' lives, in your colleagues' lives, and if you've taken internship so far in the companies and organizations you've worked with. Okay? So our job is to monitor these things, to create insights from these numbers and share them with our clients in the world of governments, corporations, and investors. These are our 3 main client groups. We do this on a daily basis with our data. We have very rich data that we share, and we're able to work with governments to help shape their vision plans, right? You have Uzbek Vision 2030, Saudi Vision 2030, right? India Vision 2045, I think it is, and a number of others around the world, right? So if you have a vision plan, we help either implement it or rearrange it, or we create one from scratch for you. If you're a corporation looking to find out what's happening in different parts of the world, where the risks are, where you should put your attention, using this model, using this data, we're able to go in and actually enact research questions that we create with you, and we help answer these research questions based off of the data that's the most reliable to build a picture of this country's trajectory, what's incentivizing them, right? What's deterring them from making decisions, and ultimately how it impacts you. Same thing for investors when they're looking to allocate capital and make the decisions based on richer data. We're able to do that as well. Okay, so have you guys seen? I don't know whether I could pull up the actual rankings for the index. If it's here, or where can I find them? But I can just give you the lowdown of, from memory, the top 5 countries, right? Because I can probably find it, but it's going to take me a bit too long. So when you're looking at the world, right? Who do you think, from the definition we gave on power, on these things, who do you think ranks the top 3, 4, and 5 in the world when it comes down to power? And when I say power, I don't mean, military, how much guns and nuclear weapons you have. I mean the ability to secure your own interest based on the 10, and I'll put it up for you here, the 10 specialized indices that we've created. I'll show you here now. There you go. These 10, okay? So if you're looking at the world and all the countries in the world, and you're seeing these 10 these specialized indices, and you're trying to gauge who in the world, right? Which countries in the world are the most capable of gathering their forces in all these 10 fields and deploying them at their will, who comes to mind as the most competent countries? from your points of view?
The three, yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The three that come to mind would be the US, China, and Russia.
US, China, and Russia. In that order?
I would say maybe US, Russia, and then China.
US, Russia, and then China. Okay. Anyone disagree? Yeah.
I think I would think more China. China, US. I'm not even sure Russia on that list. I think maybe China then US.
China, the US, and then who comes third? See, it's very easy for the top two. That's the thing. People get lazy because they see the top two are probably almost obvious, right? But how about the 4th, 5th, 20th, 61st, 82nd? Okay. The reason I bring this up is almost a trick question. The reason why it's a trick question is because when you're thinking about power, you always automatically think of the top boys and girls in town, right? You think of the US and China, right? Because that captures the attention of people the most. But if you are a country and you are Namibia, for example, right? What you have at your disposal to secure your own interest is not at the level of US or China. You are working with very much a restricted, category of tools at your disposal. Okay? So once you go in and you start to understand these countries, looking at it from the top down and seeing what China and Russia are doing in the world, or the US, is probably the easiest thing to do. It doesn't take much effort to understand these countries as much, right? Because data on these countries and the conversation around these countries is plentiful. And when it's plentiful, you think you understand these countries more because you're just more exposed to them, right? But if someone to ask you, what's your point of view on Thailand's development over the next 5 years? Most likely you're not gonna have an answer because it's not as discussed, your attention isn't there, you know? But if you're gonna be effective when you go out into the world of work, you're gonna have to understand how each and every single country, all right? What are the drivers of their development, right? Because no good saying, well, obviously Russia and the US and maybe, China and the US and maybe Russia, right? And Russia is a question mark for different reasons in people's mind. And most likely it's shaped because of what you've seen and heard post-Ukraine war and what their capabilities are, right? So if you put your knowledge, or at least your perceived knowledge of these three countries against your knowledge against any other country in the world, you'll find that your perceived knowledge of these three is much higher, yeah? So what we try to do, we bring data to this and we try to understand it through these lenses, okay? So I'll try again. Instead of China and the US, right? Because US is number 1 and China is number 2, okay? That's almost obvious. Between 3 and 5. Now, this is the area that people always struggle with because it's so up for debate as to who comes in 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right? Because number 2 and number 1, almost like the Pareto curve, the compounding developments of these two countries have dominated around the world, right? It's almost the same reason why McDonald's and Burger King are the top fast food companies in the world, right? Why Coca-Cola and Pepsi are the two dominant powers, right? It follows the same principles. But who comes 3rd, 4th, 5th in the world of soft drinks? No one really knows or really cares. But in the world of international relations and finance, you're gonna have to care, right? Because these countries are making ripples throughout the world and throughout their regions very effectively. So I wanna test your knowledge and tell me who you think comes in 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and why you think these countries across these 10 domains are making moves, or why you think they're doing well or doing badly. Okay, I want this to be open, don't be shy, give me your points of view. Okay, and then this is a chance for us just to have a discussion on these topics, for you to test your assumptions and your perceived knowledge, so that you can think about things in a much more cohesive way. Yes?
Probably Germany and
Germany?
might be also France and Singapore.
Okay, so let's say Germany. Out of these 10, right, where do you think Germany is doing well or doing badly? Do you want me to open this up more? Is this too small?
It's I don't know.
Okay.
Probably industrial capacity.
Germany's in the industrial capacity?
Yeah, and also energy security, and also they're in a pretty good geostrategic positioning.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they are pretty good in technology leadership and development,
Mm-hmm.
and also a lot of human capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're just doing great across the board. Are they?
Not really. I don't think they're that strong in financial resilience and investment capital.
Okay. You mentioned also Singapore, right?
Yeah, Singapore is, I think.
So compared to Germany, how do you think Singapore, from your studies and from your analysis, how are they doing over the last at least 5 previous years? From any analysis that you've done on it, where do you think they rival Germany in any of these 10 different areas?
It's just that obviously they're in a really good position in the world. world.
What do you mean by position?
Like geographic location.
Okay.
In which most of the trades and what goes through it. So that opens a lot for both financial resilience and also human capital. A lot of because Singapore is really strong in financial industry and also tech as well. So I think they're super strong in those two, and also they're quite economic self-resilience. And I think they're quite poor in water security.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I think they're relatively strong in technology leadership.
Okay.
And also just geostrategic position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone agree with or disagree with his assessments about Singapore? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I
Okay, Germany, whatever.
Yeah, I was just thinking about energy security. I don't think it is as secure as countries in Western Europe. I don't think it's that. I don't think that's the highlight.
Okay.
Because of its reliance on Eastern Europe, specifically the eastern part of Germany, which was formerly part of the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're gonna have to check my math on this, but I'm pretty sure its reliance on Eastern European, particularly Russian, energy supply is still quite high, and any kind of incidences and the infrastructure I think remains fairly vulnerable, perhaps malicious actors or things like that. So on that front, it might not be as strong. That's
Well, if we were to use Germany as a proxy for Europe, right? Because Germany, for all accounts, has more capability and is much more of a power engine when it comes down to manufacturing, etc. Than the majority of Europe, right? So if you're looking at Germany as a proxy, for sure, the energy security is in the toilet, because they've relied for a long time on cheap and reliable, cheap being the prominent word, energy from Russia, right? And given what's happening in Ukraine, now they need to, through sheer urgency, find other ways to secure their energy sources. But it's going to get a lot worse than it gets better, because now they have to, first of all, plug the gap that they shot themselves in the foot for Russia. But at the same time, now they're thinking of how do we diversify our energy based on true necessity, yeah? But at the same time, there's a bit of hypocrisy with this, because what tends to happen is that India buys Russian energy, they refine it and just sell it to Europe, you see? So you're going to understand, as you see these things more in depth, how hypocritical these moves are, but how bound they are by the current structures of their energy supply, that they must, on one side, speak negatively against Russia, but on the other side, they must accept Russian oil because they have nothing else, they can't do anything else. So again, rhetoric and narrative based off of reality is going to be the key differentiator when you guys are looking at the world. You had a question?
I think Japan might also be good. I mean, I'm not too sure about their minerals and stuff. And
Yeah, well, they have zero minerals.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of economic self-reliance, I know they have a lot of problems with their working age and demographic issues. So I don't know how sustainable that might be. But in terms of the other things, I think I don't know. I think
They're pretty solid, you think?
it's pretty like.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and in terms of investment attractiveness, I feel like Japan's one of the countries, obviously apart from US and China, still relatively talked about. I don't know, I feel like I stayed in a decent amount.
Just to add on about Japan as well,
Yeah.
the Nikkei 500 recently hit an all-time high, so that's positive for Japan.
Okay.
You also had Takaichi winning a landslide victory,
Yeah.
and she's very pro-fiscal.
Okay. Okay.
Progressive.
Okay, so let me ask you then, what does the Nikkei hitting all times high have to do with pension funds in Japan, for example?
Pension funds are normally they don't take on a lot of risk assets, so I don't see a lot of inflows into equities from pension funds. Pension funds would mostly invest in low yielding bonds.
The reason I asked that question is because, again, what you mentioned are the highlights that you would see in the FT, right? The election of, this prime minister, the stock market at an all-time high. These are all metrics which are used to give confidence in a specific market, right? But if you are a laborer who just became unemployed because their factory closed down for whatever reason, what does the Nikkei hitting all-time high have to do with your living standards? Because what you're going to find as technology continues to evolve with AI, companies aren't incentivized to employ people, especially if they can get this labor for half the price or cheaper by using technology. And this has been the case throughout history, you see? So what we're going to see as time passes is a bifurcation between living standards, right, and what metrics we use to measure this, and the profits of companies, right? Because almost like a tree, and the roots of the tree, the roots of the tree goes to where it's more efficient to find water, right? They're not going to grow a specific tree branch spread for you to take good pictures and put them on Instagram. They're going to grow roots in the direction where they find the most water, right? Just like corporations, they are going to grow in the most efficient ways. And sometimes that means, laying off 100,000 people across different industries, because that way they save on labor costs and they have more efficiency doing it that way. So in the market sense, these companies are doing fantastically, right? Because they're cutting costs, they're increasing revenue, and this shows up in the stock market. But in the real economy, things are very, very different, you see? So the point of these conversations here is to challenge your assumption of what it means to be good, what it means to be powerful, what it means to be successful as a country, right? Because success for different people in that country and the different stakeholders means different things. Even the word investor, guys, when you look at the word investor doesn't mean one specific character, one specific sort of monopoly man, right? Because a domestic investor, right, who produces a specific commodity or product, right, is incentivized or wants to push the government to have high tariffs, for example, because they don't want external competition coming in and eating up more of the pie, right? Whereas an external investor, right, who invests in companies which compete with the internal investor, has different incentives, and they're going to use what is in their capability to acquire their own aims. So throughout all of these questioning, it isn't to trick you. It isn't to, it's mostly there to reflect on what you assume, right? How you assume the world functions, right? And what you decide success is, and what you decide failure is for a specific country, right? Because a country is an amalgamation of different interests compiled on top of each other in a geographic location, you see? And due to the success or failure of a country, we see different things emerging, right? If a country is failing, more people are leaving that country. Less confidence is going into that country. What does that mean? That means those people have to move somewhere else. That means there's going to be, depending on where they move to, different social issues that emerge. That also is going to mean the state and how they take care of these people needs to be stretched, right? This also means that the relationships between these two countries may get stronger, make it weaker, because a lot of a country's diaspora is in X country, you see? So all of these different things moving in tandem with each other, is what we measure. And the two things that emerge from this what we call macro trend catalysts, there's two things that emerge, right? As countries across the world are in a battle to secure their own interests, what they're really in a battle for are two things, right? Attention, number one, and capital, number two, right? If you're a country, that's what you want, right? The attention on you, right? From the right stakeholders, for them to see what you're doing, and to money to flow into your country, right? For you to actually use this to, if you're democracy, if you're cynical, to keep yourself in power for the next 4 or 5 years, right? Or it is to actually help with whatever situation you've been mandated to fix. Without attention and without capital, your country is dead in the water. And the more time you're spent dead in the water, the more time your country almost calcifies, because you're not having any positive movement in that part of the world. And if things don't go positively, they tend to go in a backwards direction. Yeah, and that's what you're going to see, and that's what you've seen in many parts of the world, because attention isn't on them and capital isn't flowing to them, which means there's no incentive by internal or external players to make efficiencies, to make things move more smoothly, because these two things which really determine or dictate the prosperity of a country, with good leadership at the helm, right? If that's not there, then leadership gets lazy, they get lackadaisical, they get more corrupt, and it becomes a worse place to live over time. You had a question? 30 minutes. Okay, so we have another 30 minutes more to go. Okay, good. Okay, so from this point, when you're looking at the world and how it's developing over this time period, okay, what kinds of things do you think you're the most confident about when it comes time to understanding how the world moves, right? What have you seen, what have you read, what have you researched that you can say, this is a fundamental truth that I understand about the world and how it functions, right? From your study of economics, it could be policy, it could be whatever it is, right? Are you guys all economics grads here? Just economics, we've got law in the back? Physics, okay. So physics, so physics is the ground truth of everything. You came probably a little bit late. But I was talking about how first principles is a concept used in physics, obviously, and we use this in our analysis of world affairs. Okay, so for those who haven't spoken now, what I want to do is to hear your voice more so, and to ask you, when you're looking at the world, when you're studying things like maybe BRICS or the G7 or the G20, or when you're looking at different wars around the world, when you're looking at why countries form trade deals or whatever it is, right? Why population movements grow and change in the way that they do. What do you think comes to mind as some truths about the world that you think you're the most confident in saying this is a true fact, and I believe it for these reasons? Who can come up with some assertions or some facts from the way you see things? All right? Because it's all well and good to read it in an article or to read it in a journal, right? And just take it in and make it part of your corpus of knowledge. But it's another thing to really interrogate what you think you know. You see? So what I want to do now is to challenge you by asking that question to you. What are some fundamental truths that you believe in, that you formed an opinion on over your studies, right? That you want to share today? Not for me to rip it apart, but more so for you to get more context as to why you think about it this way. So this is a real life exercise that we do with clients all the time, by the way. All right, this isn't just a gimmick I'm using just to fill up time. This is something that we do with clients, and you'll be surprised by how much insights they gain from doing this exercise. Right. So I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking for anything spectacular in your analysis, but some simple truths, some simple correlations that you've seen in the world that you think, yeah, this I've seen happen relatively, this happens regularly, that I think this could be a ground truth about world affairs or about economics or about whatever that I'm confident in.
I guess an idea of contagion, which is like if seen across like biology or epidemics, or like even in economics, like or narratives, the spread of words, or the mouth to mouth, like just person to person, spreading ideas and such, it can be modeled almost similarly.
Mm-hmm.
You know how like the SIR model framework, and yeah, just spread of ideas or spread of like an epidemic or something. And it's just everyone has narratives, and sometimes it's communicated and just passed around and communicated. So
can you give me an example of a specific contagion that, or some examples of that you think, happen, and also why do you think some concepts spread faster than others, I suppose, is the next question. Okay, give me an example of one and then explain to me why you think this model or why specific things scale and why some things, don't.
Well, also like your example of like media and such, like and nowadays if you write something or like certain bubbles or booms or busts in our economy, it's just sometimes deviates from like fundamentals in our economic reality and stuff because of just everyone talking about it from news or people getting scared, and just like it really amplifies how people's emotions like drive our economy in some ways.
Okay. For example?
For example, the dot-com bubble.
Okay.
How like people just believe that this is changing the trajectory of our economy.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, maybe Japan's lost decade, but people's beliefs are very anchored to have inflation as expectation, and it just, no matter how much like fiscal stimulus the government put in or something, people just had anchored beliefs, and that was just spread so contagiously around. So it couldn't actually create any tangible change even through government.
Yeah. So the contagion doesn't have to be international. It could be within the parameters of the understanding or the perceptions of a specific people in a specific country, right? Yeah. So what do you think drives some of this?
I think in narrative economics, as in like people's background and what they believe to be true, prior belief systems, and like what they're exposed to in their cultures and such, that plays a role in like priming your subconscious or conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might be. And then you just spread it between people and such, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like we are social creatures.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Anyone else have a thought on this? Have you guys seen examples of this contagion, maybe within your own lives and your perceptions of specific things that you've experienced or that you've been witness to? I mean, when COVID was there, people ran to stock up on toilet paper. That's probably an example, albeit a funny one, of this idea of panic and scarcity, and in that sense, cause people to hoard the most unusual things, but is an example of how, groupthink takes over when a specific panic or sense of urgency or scarcity or danger takes hold in the people's minds. And yes, media does have is the great amplifier in this, and does do this a lot. And again, the media isn't there to serve your interests or mine; it's there to serve their own interests and either their owners or the advertisers there, right? So again, when you're reading these newspapers, when you're seeing these things, always question where and how and why this message is coming to me. Yeah, as an example.
Just on that Contagion example, because I read about this a little bit a while back. I was thinking about the GameStop short squeeze, which happened.
GameStop, right? Yeah.
So in that we had a group of sort of people on these websites like Reddit, where there was this kind of idea of let's kind of stick it to the man kind of thing. That kind of idea of let us all invest in this thing. And there was some evidence to suggest that it was a viable investment. But there was, I think, an added contagion of we want to get back at all these people who have been betting against GameStop and other companies, driving them down by engaging in these kinds of investments.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they did end up paying, and then you had that sense of sort of excitement in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Of, oh wow, now this is actually doing well, so I can make money from it,
Mm-hmm.
and also beat these evil kind of hedge funds
Mm-hmm.
that are suppressing the market, kind of not exercising too much power in the market.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of similar, I think, to the Contagion idea. I'm not 100%.
Yeah. The thing that you'll realize is that some of these things have longer term impacts, and some these things have shorter term immediate impacts. With the GameStop, it was a case of regular retail investors taking the other side of the bet and winning, right? But that wasn't something that was replicated, or it wasn't made institutional as a behavior change across retail investing. It was an interesting blip or an interesting sets of circumstances that couple maybe a frustration of how perceptions of the market and how it may be perceived to be rigged or to be outweighed by major players, and the power that retail has in seeing the price of a stock go in the opposite direction. That was something which was interesting for that specific situation, but you didn't see a ripple effect of it impacting any other thing, right? So it was almost like a blip in time. Whereas the case of Japan, that mentality still stayed, right? Again, I'm talking only about it from a very high level point of view, right? But the fact that interest rates are kept artificially low, so government borrowing remains cheap, they haven't managed to get out of that hole, So understanding what is the input of a specific catalyst, right? What caused it to drive, right? What means did it have to spread, right? What was the impact immediately? And what are the ripple effects or the after impacts that you can measure and then you can see? Because a lot of the time, you're going to have a perception of how something will take off, but it goes in the completely opposite direction, right? It could be the price of a stock. It could be interest rates, right? It could be a policy. It could be a geopolitical activity, right? You see? Who was going to bet that Trump would kidnap the leader of Venezuela in his first term, right? That was something unheard of, right? Well, not unheard of it. I mean, it's happened in the case before, but it came out of the blue, I suppose you'd say, right? You see? So when you're looking at analyzing these things, this thread of activity, sometimes it's not useful to grab the whole rope, but look at the developments look at that whiplash through some of the threads that have disproportionately bigger impacts to that whiplash than holding the whole thread of the whole rope along the way. Because you think more information means more insights, but a lot of the time it means more noise. You see? So when you're looking at the world and how it's transforming and the drivers behind it, again, this is another way that you guys can use on a daily basis to make these assumptions and to make these links to developments that happen in their own time. You see? So that's an example. So Contagion and its various forms, or how groupthink can take over and can build momentum to impact a specific thing for the long run, or for a specific development like GameStop, is an example perhaps of something that you see happen constantly, and a good way to analyze it is the way I said, right? Anything else? Any other thing that you've seen throughout your life studying, or that you've experienced, and you think, oh, this is something that I'm confident in saying is how the world functions, or this is a subset of a behavior that I think is worthwhile focusing on?
I don't know, this kind of thing, I kind of believe strongly in this, but I feel like...
You don't believe strongly?
I think
You do?
strongly in this, investment banking will become quite big in Russia if the war ends.
Okay.
The reason I believe that is because I feel like Russia will kind of become the central point for the West.
Okay.
Like to have access to like the Indian market and the Chinese market.
Okay.
We actually saw that historically as well, like in 2008 to 2014, when Russia was kind of trying to become more pro-Western. And like banks like Deutsche, Citi, and Credit Suisse, for example, like they all moved there. And investment banking became like pretty big, and there was one.
Yeah.
So that's why I feel like that will just be like a very profitable field in the future. What do you think about that?
Okay. If I discovered there was a whiteboard, I would have written more things. But whenever I'm hearing something like this, right, or whenever you guys hear a statement like investment banking will take off when the war in Ukraine ends, right? That's a statement, right? Right. So when I'm listening to something like this and I'm hearing your explanation, I'm picking out keywords that then I need to drive into deep to understand what you mean by them, right? So that you understand, or maybe you correct your assumptions of these things. And when you do that, your problem statement or your perception could change in sometimes a dramatic way, okay? So a few things that I picked up that I had the time to write, right? You said pro-Western, right? Between a specific time period, right? So what evidence have you got to say that Russia was moving towards a more pro-Western system? And explain to me precisely that scenario, or how you see it, and the timings and the dates and all these things, just so that you can build a picture in your mind to defend that statement that you made of pro-Western, right? What does pro-Western number one mean, right? And how did you see Russia moving towards it? So to make it easy, answer these two questions.
Yeah, okay, well, I don't know the specific times and dates.
Okay.
Well, we saw a lot of things, well, as I said before, like American, just European banks have been moving towards Russia, which...
When you mean moving towards Russia, what do you mean moving towards Russia?
Up, like, divisions and offices there.
Okay. So they've had a presence in Russia, okay?
Yes, they started like opening up their presence, and we also saw actually Morgan Stanley.
Okay.
There was in 2014 they were opening up this. They wanted to open up a division in Russia, but
okay.
They're not doing it. So
okay.
It's like someone that they would voice that.
Okay.
But so that those kind of things, like we also saw kind of Western companies coming to Russia a lot more. Like it's like very simple, like McDonald's, they all started opening up branches there. And that's what I mean that they come pro-Russian, like pro-Western.
So when you say pro-Western, you mean they've just accepted Western institutions and companies to operate within their borders?
No, more like kind of changing from kind of that Soviet Eastern mindset more towards like say American or UK thinking. The way like of running business, the way of just in general, just like the way the country should be run. I think they were more shifted towards that.
The way the country should be run.
Well, not that's I worded that wrong. Like, just in general, how they felt. I feel like it was kind of more because I'm Russian.
Okay.
So I don't know. That's kind of what it kind of felt like.
Okay.
I spoke to a bunch of people. That's what they were saying.
Okay.
Well, like about that.
Okay. So what you're saying is that from the fall of communism.
They were like turning a lot more capitalist. Like,
Yeah,
they're definitely. So when Soviet Union fell, that was a big capitalist.
Yeah. So when the Soviet Union fell, from your parents' probably experience more so than your own, right? Because you probably weren't born when that happened, right? And from what your parents probably told you, right? Depending on when they moved here, or if they moved here or whatever, that there was a big change in Russia, right? And the biggest change happened when a system like that falls, right? Institutions need to then adapt, and different power structures and different people take over specific industries, right? So it was a big fire sale of all the big industries sold to private hands, right? For very, very cheap compared to what they were actually valued at, right? And what that allowed to happen is for free markets, or at least more liberalized markets, to take hold in Russia, right? And that is Western only because you can say that it was invented in the West, free markets was invented in the West, yeah? And then companies like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, whatever came into the country, right? And for whatever reason, you are saying now that that trend has gone the other way because of the war in Ukraine. And then you say when the war ends, right? So then you're assuming when the war ends, you're assuming that maybe Putin is ousted, dies, or whatever, and a new leader comes in, and more activity happens, or what? What under what circumstances when you say war ends, put some more meat on the bone?
Well, we can look at it like from two perspectives. I feel like because so if Putin's still in power when the war ends, then I feel like because Putin has quite a good relationship with Trump.
Okay.
So I feel like they'll try to do a lot.
How do you know?
Well, it's,
because of what Trump says?
Well, yeah, it's just I don't know. I feel like it's it's like.
Apart from the tweets or whatever that Trump says about we got a great relationship, what other things give you confidence that they have a good relationship? And also when you say they have a good relationship, do you mean the leaders? Do you mean the FSB and the CIA? Do you mean which organs of the system have good relations?
I would say the leaders. I mean, I'm not sure about the CIA how that works.
Yeah.
I would say the leaders.
Okay.
I would say the leaders. They're like, I mean, it's not like they're best friends, right? I don't know if that's the case
Yeah.
or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like say with Biden, like you could see how like it was completely different the way Biden viewed Putin and Russia is completely different to the way Trump views it.
Well, views it in the public sphere, right? In the public sphere, you mean? So the tweets he puts up, the interviews he does, the speeches he gives, he tries to portray him as being cordial at worst, or buddy at best, right? With a lot of world leaders, right? And you're taking that as an assumption as if and when the war finishes soon, what happens to Russia? You say that if and when it ends, you still haven't told us under what circumstances does the war end? Because the circumstances of the peace deal will determine the business activity afterwards. You see? You see what I mean? So again, these are the point is, from a simple statement of investment banking is going to be huge in Russia when the war ends, a whole host of other questions come up when you go down and drive into the definitions and the assumptions you have of that statement. You see what I mean? And how your perceptions will need to be much more focused when answering this question. Because tomorrow, if you start to work for a bank or you start to work for a country, that's what they're going to do to your statements. They're going to ask you how, where, who, what, where, why, when, right? And if you just say, well, that's what the internet's telling me, it's not good enough. So even when you're writing your papers today, in whatever lessons you take, always questioning whatever problem statement you have and going down the list of, again, using the concept of first principles. Why? Okay, define this. Okay, why do I think about it this way? And going through this set of exercises for whatever thing that you see, that you read, right, or that you experience, is going to be something that should be second nature to you the more you do it, And you being a physicist, probably have a step ahead of a lot of people because you do that in any case when you're looking at when you're looking at the subatomic and galactic world that we live in, right? You see what I mean? Okay. Anything else? Anything juicy now? Anything that you see that, or maybe something that you don't agree with that we can convince you that is actually true? Anything that you see is abhorrent maybe in the world, or something that you feel, I believe this is wrong, or this shouldn't happen in this way. It could be, yeah, okay. And then we'll get to you also, yeah.
This is like, I'm thinking that the recruitment of, so the pivots towards artificial intelligence in create in terms of like the entry level tasks is not a really is it's bad in that it's not sustainable for businesses in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
If a company is going to replace junior talents with AI and things like that,
Okay.
or like replace the task, okay, so or maybe replace the tasks and in turn perhaps replace workers as a result. And I'm just thinking like who's going to replace the old guard once they leave?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is just purely off like the top of my head. I haven't really got thoughts on it.
Okay.
It's one I think I do believe in.
Okay. Let's get your one now. And then we'll see which one is better to interrogate.
Something quite simple, like competition is good for welfare.
Competition is good for?
Welfare.
What do you mean by that?
I mean consumer welfare.
Okay.
Why do I think this? Because
So no, make that problem statement more accurate. Okay, so competition in what?
competition in product markets.
So competition in commerce
Yeah.
leaves the average Joe better off. You don't agree with that?
I think it's kind of true.
Okay.
Why? Because it's pretty standard like theory, and that's the whole reason why competition authorities exist, right? To promote competition.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you have a monopoly firm, then they can just hike prices because consumers have no other option.
Okay.
Whereas if there is competition, then firms are forced to sell, for example, at lower prices, or they're forced to compete and innovate and create better products at lower prices for consumers.
Okay.
So that leaves the average consumer better off.
Okay. So what's your belief then in this? So what do you believe about this? You think that competition does more harm than good? Is that what you believe, or what exactly? How can we encompass this into a specific statement?
Yeah, I would believe that this is overall competition is good in essence. It's
Competition is
more
good.
than it is bad.
So competition is good. Okay. And then we have your problem statement about AI. So how would you define that if you were to give it a problem statement?
How do I define artificial intelligence?
No. How would you define the problem statement? You're saying that artificial intelligence is overhyped, or what would you say as your call to action?
Can you just give me a second?
To think about it. Okay.
I think I would say that the use of I think it's replacing junior talent with artificial intelligence entirely and completely eliminating significant portions of the junior workforce with artificial intelligence for short-term profit gain is not sustainable in the long term, since you're going to have a loss of workers and perhaps a loss of skills to go with it.
Okay.
Which in turn will lead to perhaps improper leadership
Okay.
or company direction in the future.
Okay. So AI replacing junior talent is unsustainable in the long run. That's your problem statement, basically, right?
Yeah.
So which one out of these two do you guys want to interrogate first? Oh, I think we have time for only one. So which one do you want to interrogate? AI or competition? Hands up for AI. Hands up for AI. Hands up says 1, 2, 2, 3. Okay, and hands up for competition. 1, 2. Like someone's not voting here. Okay, so hands up for AI. Up high. High. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, hands up for competition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. You didn't vote behind. You there. AI. Okay. Let's do the AI. I'm sorry for competition, but let's do the AI example. Okay. Okay. So, what's your inherent assumption when you say this first? What do I think of, for example? Okay. I think of when you say replace junior talent. Okay. The first place my mind goes to is what industry are you focusing on when you say that? Because that was quite broad. Junior talent could be junior plumbers, right? It could be junior teachers. It could be junior software developers or coders. Who do you mean by that?
I mean, white collar occupations, that's true from this side.
Okay, but even white collar is massive, right?
I still think, yeah.
Okay, so white collar is anyone who wears a suit to work, basically, right? See what I mean? So be more specific. So my point, even there at that point, right? When you're looking at these things, you're assuming every single industry as a junior starter behaves in the same way, right? Or has similar tasks. The AI can take AI can take. That could be true or not true, right? So be more specific in yourself when you say this.
I'm speaking from my own personal experience.
Okay.
In terms of the financial services.
Okay. So junior staff in which industry exactly?
Perhaps the person
Investment banker. So junior staff in okay. So junior investment. Okay. So new starter investment bankers, right? From intern up to analyst. Yeah, these are the guys which are under threat, right? That's what. So you're simply saying these guys are under threat, and if you get rid of these guys, when the old guys leave, who's going to actually take over the jobs for them to graduate into, right? Yeah, okay. So how do you understand that yourself? How do you think companies are looking at this themselves when they're making these decisions as to who to hire, who to fire, and how to reorient their organization? What do you think is going through their minds? And do you think they're seeing these things as clearly as well? Or do you think they're missing the point? Okay. Okay.
Perhaps they're looking at it in terms of maybe they're thinking about it more in terms of eliminating unproductive workers rather than necessarily eliminating workers in all workers or to all junior staff entirely. They're just eliminating the ones who aren't perhaps using AI to its fullest capacity, who are not perhaps something or maybe or are perhaps not that good at the job.
Okay.
And by eliminating those workers, they still have competent workers left over and they will eventually take over.
Yeah.
That might be something they're thinking about. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. So your point of view, just to summarize it, is that if you're a leader, if you're head of HR, or if you're head of talent development in, let's say, Barclays, for example, and you're looking at the impact that AI could have on productivity, okay? So some of you guys may want to go into banking. So this is a real live question for you guys too, right? Is it worthwhile me applying to these jobs if Grok can just take it over, right? Or if Claude can do it better than me, right? So this is a real question currently, right? The zeitgeist is around this topic, okay? So you are a new graduate and you're saying to yourself, oh, investment banking looks nice and profitable. I want to become an investment banker, right? And you come up ahead with a software which can do the same work as you're doing. You're looking at it from the point of view of hiring, but what about from the point of view of those who actually apply for jobs, right? What if AI doesn't actually do all the great work that they say it's going to do, but the perception in the minds of you students, right, is so entrenched that it's going to take over my job eventually, therefore I'm not even going to bother applying to it, right? Then there's a deficit of talent at the very bottom end, you see? Yeah, you're saying that. And also what you said about Japan, right? The perception is going to be so strong in the minds, perhaps, of students, that if AI can just do this, then I'm just going to study literature, I'm going to do something completely different with my life and not bother, right? If enough people say this, and there's a trend towards less applicants in these jobs because AI is perceived to be more powerful or more capable than you are as an individual, then what does that do to the ratio of people who apply to those who actually hire? So your point of view, again, was from the view of hiring. So even from that point of view, and when you're looking at it, you're looking at it from that side of things. You see what I mean? It could be that fewer good candidates apply as well. You know, talent isn't equally distributed amongst the applicants. You know, so the most talented, and you can use universities as a proxy for talent, let's say, right? So you guys, right? Yeah, me when I was here as well included, let's say, are from one of the most elite institutions in the world, right? Let's use that as a proxy for talent, right? It may not be, yeah, but let's just say it is, right? So if you and your colleagues, right, at UCL economics undergrad, and your colleagues from the LSE, and your colleagues from King's, and your colleagues from St. Andrews, and your colleagues from Imperial, and your colleagues from Oxford Cambridge, and your colleagues from Harvard, and your colleagues from Yale, and all of these different kids, right, who come through the system and think, actually, I don't want to do this. Why? Because there's too much competition. AI is going to eventually replace me, right? What does that do to that labor pool? So from your question of AI is going to take over jobs, so many other questions come out from that, from just a simple inquiry from your point. You see what I mean? You see, so even if you become a journalist tomorrow and you start writing for a publication, right? You need to do this line of inquiry for your questions because your stories become richer and your research and your actual production of work becomes even better, you know? So this lecture / talk wasn't a typical, this is how markets move, right? Because I thought you guys get this in any case. I did want to add an extra level of just dry analysis on a topic of interest rates or whatever and just give it to you. This was meant to be a bit more of an interactive session where you can see where your place in the world is now, right? How you decide to move your careers forward, along with real world insights into what it's like in the world of work and the kinds of topics that your bosses initially are going to be thinking of, or if you decide to become an entrepreneur, how the market perceives these developments, right? Because no matter, even if you work for yourself, your bosses are your clients in any case, right? So you always have to see how the other views this, you see, to make yourself effective. How long have you got?
I think we're nearing
We're
the
done?
end of our session,
Okay.
if you understand.
Okay, so to wrap up, what I would say is for you guys to be really effective in the work you do, whether it's in law, right? Whether it's physics, whether it's economics, international relations, whatever it is, the ability to use first principles is going to be the most important tool that you can develop, period. Right? Period. It isn't understanding the history of economics. It isn't understanding, facts about what you study. It's about understanding the incentives that drive the decisions of the people you work with and your clients and those who you observe, right? The more you can do this and the more you can use this first principles approach, and this was an example of how the things on this board, right? And how these things grow and develop and change, right? And thirdly, the more you can understand that narrative drives so much of your perception, which then drives behavior, which then drives capital flow, which then drives outcome, right? In that order. And the more you can do this consistently in your time in school, and then as you get out, the more effective you'll be in understanding how this world really works. And that's when you become useful, right? And that's when you become really valuable, right? So this was just an exercise in this for you. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions afterwards, come through and ask me, okay? Thank you, guys.